Good morning. Welcome to episode 57 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined by Mia O'Brien to break down the Liam Coen saga. Liam was going to return to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to become the highest paid coordinator in NFL history on a new 3-year deal, but he did not end up taking the contract. As me and I talked about yesterday, didn't really matter too much whether he actually put ink to paper or not, because he probably could have broken it anyway. But he ended up returning to Jacksonville yesterday after the Jaguars fired general manager Trent Baalke, and now the expectation league-wide is that Liam Coen and the Jacksonville Jaguars will come to an agreement for him to become their 8th full-time head coach in franchise history at some point this morning, maybe early in the afternoon, but we're really expecting the news to potentially break any minute now. So, Mia, where to even begin? I mean, it's been probably the craziest 72 hours, maybe of my life, let alone covering the team or just being a sports fan. Where do you want to start here?
I want to begin with first and foremost, Gus. While we appreciate everybody who's going to pop in here for this live instant reaction slash trying to recap the last 36 to 48 hour podcast. There are some of you who believe that the reason we are going live at 10:10 is because that is when the news is going to break. We are optimistic that the news may break in the next half hour while we're live here on the 1010XL Jaguars channel, Gus. But I have no insight to tell me that it actually will occur in the next half hour. We're literally just going live now because I have a call at 11. I have a painter coming to my house. So at some point or another, I'm going to have to get up from this chair in the home studio and let him in. So just so you know, folks, we are going live because we didn't get a chance to last night because Gus and I made the executive decision of we don't know what turn this is going to take next. And so therefore, we're going to just hold off till the morning so we can collect our thoughts, give you the very latest on what we are hearing, what we are thinking is about to unfold in Jacksonville.
I mean, this is.
I mean, I covered the hiring and the firing of Urban Meyer, and that was one of the wildest 11 months of my young life, let alone my career, Gus. And nothing compares to the last 36 hours. And that has been echoed to me by people around the league who are just in shock at what has occurred in Jacksonville. And we're going to look at this from a couple different lenses, because while we've enjoyed laughing at the expense of our friends down in Tampa Town and the fans that are crying right now, there's plenty of people around the league who also look at this and say, man, what does this say about the Jaguars? What does this say about Liam Coen? There are those who tell me this says the Jaguars mean business. There are those who have told me this is a bad look for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And so we're excited to get your thoughts. So be sure to leave a comment, leave a question, and we'll get to it throughout the course of today's podcast.
Yeah, I'm not so sure why it would be a bad look for the Jaguars, or I guess I don't necessarily agree with it, or especially with Liam Coen either, because like the league is a business. We've heard that perspective when players get cut and when we talk about like running backs don't matter and all these things in terms of player transactions and player value and how much money they're making. And so now when it comes to head coaches making multi-millions of dollars, like I don't really blame Liam Coen at all for not talking to the Bucs yesterday and then going out and getting a job that would pay him twice as much money with more job security that only 31 other people in the world had the opportunity to do. And so to me, it's like maybe it seems sneaky from the Bucs perspective. And like if anything, like the Bucs and their fan base and even some of their media being so pissed off, frankly, about Coen leaving and the way that he did it probably speaks volumes about just how respected he is inside and outside the building and how much they didn't want him to go. That was, I mean, pretty evident by the fact that they made him the offer to be the highest paid coordinator in league history. But I mean, I don't know. I think Liam is like, I don't think it's a sneaky move. I think it was just, he's a real G for moving in silence like that and kind of securing his own bag. I really have no issues about it. And I guess I am a little biased since I am on the Jacksonville side of things, but it is funny that the Jaguars are able to kind of like quote unquote beat up on teams like this, especially in the offseason, because like no team really dunks on the Jaguars. The Jaguars always dunk on themselves in a lot of ways, but really they don't get dunked on by other teams, at least off the field a lot. But they kind of dunked on Tampa Bay here, and I think that they're feeling some type of way about it, but I don't really think it was that sneaky of a move. I think it was just good business by Coen and the Jaguars.
Yes, I had someone describe it to me. I'm going to read it verbatim because I thought it was the best way to describe what just happened. Ultimately, the one I know we're going to say that Liam Coen needs to go into the pride because he got Trent Baalke fired. I know that there are people talking about that, and he's never even coached a game for the Jacksonville Jaguars. But I do think that his representation deserves a lot of credit. Here's something that was shared with me, and I want to read it verbatim because I think it's the best way to look at this. It was a great gambling move. Only one team wanted the client, but the agent played his hand perfectly. They thought he had 4 aces. He totally bluffed and won, while also ridding Jacksonville of a cancer and making Liam generational wealth in the process.
The whole thing is crazy. It's like
I mean, we talked about Baalke masterclass. This was the real masterclass. Little did we know in the moment.
And it almost might have been Baalke's own fault because we talked about how like the Jaguars were kind of taking their time in this hiring process. And so maybe if they were able to get Coen into the building earlier, he would have been okay with accepting the job even with Baalke there. But I think that the Jags being slow in the process allowed Coen to have more time to think about it and allowed more time for the Bucs to give him a better offer and kind of sweeten the offer that they have there in Tampa Bay. But then because Liam thought about it and then denied the job, then Trent Baalke was fired. And then once Trent Baalke was fired, and not just Trent Baalke being fired, but Jacksonville was supposedly offering more money, saying that Coen could choose essentially his own general manager, offering more than just saying, all right, we got rid of Baalke, you want the same deal? It wasn't necessarily that, but that was obviously the big domino. And so it's just been not even a crazy 72 hours, just a crazy week. This coaching cycle is wild. I was saying it feels like draft talk a couple of shows ago, just because there's so many rumors swirling around. You don't know what's happening. And now, like the last 24, 48 hours, I felt like a college transfer portal. Maybe not a transfer portal, but like signing day, where it's like people are flipping left and right. You don't really know what's going to happen until it's official. And so technically this one's not quite official yet, but we think we've got everything down.
We've got several questions in the comments that we will get to. Yes, Carlos, I couldn't agree more. I forgot the playoffs were still going on. We actually, Kevin, my boyfriend, and I are sitting in the home studio last night trying to like process all this. I throw on the NFL Network on our TV. They had the Insiders program on. We're thinking, okay, maybe Rappaport's going to pop up and he's going to have the, contract details, et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, you could tell behind the scenes, he's like shook because he can't believe this is happening. They get through the duration of the hour-long program on the NFL Network, and they go to a replay of the 2021 and AFC divisional game between the Bills and the Chiefs. And I was like, oh, I forgot that like this is it. And even during the Insiders, they start talking about the 2 games on Sunday. And Kevin goes, we don't care. Like we literally like keep it moving. No one actually cares about the games. We're so focused, at least here in Duval, on the task at hand, which is getting Liam Coen in the door. So a couple things. First and foremost, I don't want to speak on the nature of why it didn't work the first ask, but the second ask suddenly Ben Johnson. I'm going to get to Ben Johnson here in a second. Liam Coen was here, right? So let's start with this. I was told, and I was in communication with people involved with Liam Coen. I actually was, I believe, the person who first alerted some of them to the news that Trent Baalke was being retained and that Doug Peterson had been fired. Because in the 3 previous months in communicating with folks over there, the rest of the league anticipated it would be a clean sweep. It would be a complete overhaul here in Jacksonville. And that is why not only did the Coen camp identify this as the number 1 job available, but so many people did. So, of course, now the painter's here. Hold that thought, Gus. Keep talking. I told him this was going to happen. Stand by.
Mia's got a lot of home construction stuff going on, so she's just got to let someone into the room. But yeah, everyone's asking in the comments who's the next general manager going to be. That's definitely one of my questions for Mia, because John Spytek was unofficially hired as the general manager for the Raiders earlier in the week, but then once Liam kind of supposedly flipped on his deal with the Bucs, or at least didn't sign it, then everyone was like, oh, well, technically John Spytek hasn't signed his deal, but Spytek did sign his deal, I think this morning, if not last night. So John Spytek, who was an assistant GM, or at least in the front office in some capacity in Tampa Bay, is off the board as a potential general manager. Ray Agnew is a name that a lot of people seem to like. He's from Detroit. He's a guy that I've mentioned along with Ben Johnson. You can keep going wherever you left off.
Sorry. I should have known as I get into my soliloquy. Shout out to Denny, who's the man who's doing the painting right now. Did you get to this, Gus? Not surprising, as predicted. on this podcast. Pete Carroll, about to be potentially the next head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, as predicted on this podcast. A lot of fun. A lot of fun. Okay, so I knew, and again, I think I was one of the ones who may have alerted some folks in that camp that Trent Baalke was being retained. And there was concern from the onset. Not concern, but all right, that changes some things, right? I agree, and I know the batting average isn't the strongest per se, but I tend to agree with what some of the reports out of The Athletic, who do not have a local Jacksonville Jaguars reporter, have been, Diana Rossini chief among them, that Trent Baalke's involvement did give a different perception of the job here in Jacksonville. That I agree with. I do think, and again, I don't have this on the record yet, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but from piecing the different reports last night together, it appears to me that it wasn't just the presence of Trent Baalke. It appears to be the initial offer from the Jaguars for Liam Coen was not what the initial offer would have been if they were offering Ben Johnson the job. And so this is a case, at least from my vantage point, and just this is me tying things together. I've not been told this concrete, but tying things together, this is a matter of knowing your worth and also recognizing the Jaguar situation and where your leverage is. And so I'll be honest. Again, I don't know these numbers, but Gus, let's say the Jaguars, who, for what it's worth, have never given a coach a contract that is more than 4 years in duration. And by the way, Doug Peterson was not among the top 10 paid coaches in the National Football League the last 3 years, despite the fact that he has a Super Bowl crown. I do not know exactly how much Doug was making, but I know it was less than Mike McDonald, and Mike McDonald made $9 million in his first year. So file that one away. Is this to say the Jaguars and Trent Baalke went to Liam Coen on Saturday or Sunday and said, yeah, we're thinking like six or seven for a 4-year deal. It's like 6 or 7 million a year. And meanwhile, his camp has on good authority what Ben Johnson is making from the Bears. And additionally, what the Johnson camp may have said to Shad Khan of, you need to come to this number if you want Ben Johnson. And while, yes, Ben Johnson has 2 more years of play calling experience over Liam Coen in the National Football League, they're the same age, and neither has been a head coach before. So it's ultimately a dart throw for both. It's always a dart throw to begin with in this process. But essentially, this is a matter, from my vantage point, this is a matter of knowing your worth and saying, do I really want to take just 1 million more a year, which I think all of us would take 1 million more, but that's a story for another time. Do you really want to take just 1 million more to go to a situation where you have trepidation because of the incumbent general manager versus Tampa now is willing to give you 4.5, potentially up to $5 million a year. So we're splitting hairs now. It's a $1 million difference, and you can stay in a system that you know works. And so that's where I don't think this was solely, they didn't want to work with Trent Baalke at the negotiating table. Liam Coen starts presenting GM names and says, I'm not coming unless Baalke's gone. I don't think that is where this got to. I think the negotiating tactics, and I don't think it's Trent's job to actually be saying the dollar amount. And that's why I don't want to speak out of turn. However, again, this is just me piecemealing different reports and what different people are hearing together. That's what I get as one of the bigger sticking points in this situation, was that the Jaguars, which as much as we love to say that Shad Khan is willing to spend on players and facilities, which he is, historically speaking, they have not compensated their head coaches not named Urban Meyer the way that many other teams in the National Football League have. Part of that is because they've never had, outside of Tom Coughlin and perhaps Doug Peterson, one of the elite head coaches in the National Football League. But that's what I keep coming back to. And that, for me, is all I need to know about Liam Coen and where he stands. That's knowing your worth. That's knowing what your values are. And that says a lot about what the Jaguars are in the next few hours. The hope is, if not while we're on the air here, are about to get as their head coach.
Now, so my question for you based off that is, from the Jaguars' perspective, do you think that like Liam Coen and Ben Johnson were their 2 guys and they wanted to do whatever really possible to get either one of them? Or was it like a panic move where once Ben Johnson went away, Aaron Glenn went away, Liam Coen supposedly went back to Tampa Bay, they said, I don't know about waiting around for Joe Brady or Cliff Kingsbury or Kellen Moore. Let's just go try to get Liam Coen because the market is drying up. Where do you think it falls on that spectrum?
I said it on this podcast previously, and I'll say it again, Gus. 1A, 1B. And I think the A and B are more interchangeable than people realize. It was always Liam Coen or Ben Johnson. And I
Okay.
expect Shad Khan to say as much on the dais when they introduce him as the next head coach. Because even after they completed a great interview with Joe Brady, a great interview with Aaron Glenn, the sentiment around the Miller Electric Center was, we were told through the back channels that Liam Coen would surprise us and that he actually could emerge as a front runner. And after his first round interview, those thoughts and the notion, it was verified to the people at the Miller Electric Center. And so that's why I think it was always Liam or Ben. There was no question. And so to your point, when now you've lost on Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, who, hey, maybe was a name you could consider, he was always going to go to the Jets or the Saints, in my opinion. And now you lose on him, and now you potentially lose on Liam Coen. That's where I think, and again, I definitely don't want to speak out of turn when it comes to Tony Baselli's involvement in this, but it is fascinating, is it not, that we suddenly know that Tony Baselli is now involved in the process. And I love the memes. Please keep them coming. I don't know if you can comment a meme on the YouTube chat, but if you can, please do. I've been getting a kick out of the ones of Tony went down to Tampa and got him. I don't know if Tony even flew on the PJ. I don't think he did, because Liam took it back last night to be with his sick child. So point being, it is rather fascinating. I said it in my quick hits yesterday. I think I said it on the podcast as well, that I anticipated priority number one was going to be to try to circle back with the Coen camp. And it's a credit to the Jaguars that they were able to successfully do that. I think it's a credit to Ethan Waugh, quite frankly, if he was involved. And I don't know if it was all Shad, if Ethan was involved, if it was all Tony. I don't know the answer to that. But the fact that they're doing this bodes well for him, if not here in Jacksonville, then somewhere else, that he was able to, at the very least, help in some part make this a reality, that they went right back and said, nope, we're coming right back. And we know we fudged up with the offer earlier this week, so we're up in the ante. And it's, like I said off the top, I think it was a gamble by Liam and his camp. It was a win-win for them ultimately, up until last night when both sides backed themselves into a corner that there's no return. That's why we don't feel bad doing this podcast right now. Because at this point in time, now he decides at 10:30 he's not going to sign the paperwork. He can't go back to Tampa.
Right. That's what makes me so confident, is that he burnt that bridge. And so they're not going to want him back. And the thing that I was going to say that makes it so fascinating to me too, is that this is just the two teams that are within a couple hours of each other, that are just in the top of Florida, are in this bidding war over this coach, and the rest of the league is paying attention. Yeah, but Liam Coen didn't get any other head coach interviews, and I don't think it's a negative on him. I think it's just what our coworker Hayes Carline has brought up, is that he's had kind of a relative lack of experience, and I think a lot of coaches want more experience, but I think a lot of or NFL owners want Dan Campbell. They see Dan Campbell and what he's done in Detroit, and they say, yeah, I want that culture guy. And so obviously Ben Johnson and Liam Coen got hired, but I think the Aaron Glenn type architect is what a lot of owners are going to try to pivot towards and want. And so what I'm trying to say is, I think that just because Liam Coen didn't seem that wanted outside of North Central Florida, doesn't mean that he's not a great candidate. I think that he's just a gem under the radar based on how these two organizations are acting to try to get him.
Yes. And I think it's very situational. I had to explain it to somebody else around the league this morning. They're like, I still don't get though why no one requested Liam Coen. And I'm like, do you want me to, I did a whole segment on helmets and heels. I'm like, and I've done it on Duval Rundown. Do you need me to go step by step here? Two of the organizations hiring a head coach right now are so incestual, with all due respect to the Cowboys and the Saints. They're always going to hire their own or a retread. Brian Schottenheimer potentially could be a head coach by the end of the day today, folks. And I like Shotty from my 1 year of working with him. Great guy. But yeah, just think about that for a second here. And then you've got the Bears, who, even if he's not his best friend, Shane Waldron was the one who brought Liam Coen into the NFL. He was scapegoated last year. They also interviewed Liam for their offensive coordinator position last year. And so bye. The Jets didn't request Ben Johnson either. And from my intel, that's because Ben Johnson's camp made it known that they did not want to go to New York. And I don't know if Liam Cohen's camp explicitly said that. I have it on good intel that the Jets camp or the Johnson camp did. So perhaps that's the case there. The Patriots, it was always Vrabel. And the Raiders, I honestly think if the Jaguars hadn't swooped in and did what they did over the last 36 hours, I believe that John Spytek would have turned back around and said, okay, I love you guys in Tampa, but can I bring Liam with me? And while I think Pete Carroll was always option two besides Ben Johnson for them, I do think that there would have been an opportunity there to maybe pivot and try to bring in a young offensive mind, even though you don't have a quarterback there. And so that's why for the Coen camp, it was always, if we're going to leave Tampa, we need to go somewhere where there is an established quarterback.
Absolutely. Yeah, there was someone in the comments earlier asking if Coen is going to want to trade Trevor. Absolutely not. He would not be taking this job if Trevor.
He's taking the job for Trevor. And by the way, I said it yesterday. I said it on Helmets and Heels. I also have on good intel that Ben Johnson picked Caleb Williams. Not that he picked Caleb Williams over Trevor, but that he picked Caleb Williams. So file that one away, because for Liam Coen, it was Trevor. So if you're Trevor Lawrence, you're pretty happy right now, because the guy who wanted to work with you is who at this moment is the one who's coming. By the way, for those of you who are tuned in and maybe not seeing, Pete Carroll officially is the next head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. Interestingly enough, and I want to go back to a question we had, Gus, about what Liam Coen's contract could look like in Jacksonville. Pete Carroll will have a 3-year deal with a 4th-year team option. That's interesting to me because, number one, 3-year deals are kind of weird. We do know that Mark Davis is still paying the likes of Antonio Pierce and Josh McDaniels after firing them over the last 3-year period. But at the same time, it's interesting because, yes, Pete is 72 years old. And so the thought would be, okay, is he really going to be coaching forever? But does this say that Pete will be the head coach for the next 3 to 4 years while also developing and combing his successor and whatever quarterback situation ends up playing out there? I want to go back. Let me see who it was, Gus. Somebody asked about what do we think the contract will look like? That was, sorry guys, if you missed it, I had to get up and let my painter in. Gator WP at 1018 said, any insight on contract details? My expectation is that this will not be a 4-year contract. I could be off because Shad Khan has only historically ever given 4-year head coaching contracts, but my understanding is that it will be something more in the ballpark of what Dave Canales got a year ago from the Carolina Panthers. Yep. Hef hit the nail on, I don't know about 90 million Hef, but 6 years. Yes. 6 years is what I anticipate. I could see a 5-year deal with more upfront money akin to what Mike McDonald got from the Seattle Seahawks, but this is not going to be a 4-year contract in my estimation. I have on good intel, it will be somewhere. It will either be a 5 or a 6-year deal. Shane Steichen, once upon a time, don't forget, also got a 6-year deal from the Indianapolis Colts, in large part because given the chemically imbalanced owner, he wanted a little bit of job security there. And at the very least, to guarantee he'd be paid for the next 6 years. And so I'm not saying that that's the case here in Jacksonville, but I do think that there will be a longer leash with Liam Coen because he is a first-time head coach and because he's going to have the opportunity alongside Shad Khan to identify the next general manager as well.
Speaking of general manager, that was going to be my segue into just talking about the future, especially since everyone in the comments does want to know your thoughts on who potential names could be at that spot. Do you expect for the general manager to be given a similar leash of 6 years or whatever it is? Or do you think that they're not going to want to give it to that much of a leash to multiple higher ranking people? Or does it kind of depend on who it actually is?
Let's crack out the list, Gus Logue.
The list.
From our episode from 2 weeks ago when we did the GM of Thrones, and so many people came to me and they said, why are you doing that? Trent still has a job. And I said, I don't know, just in case we got to workshop some names. And for those of you who missed that episode of Duval Rundown, Gus and I divided into tiers because we love tiers at 1010XL. We divided it into the, hey, these guys could come and flesh out the front office at the top. The tier of, hey, if Trent Baalke has said goodbye, these are the names who would be a full-time GM. And then another tier of, these are perhaps a second assistant general manager who could be brought in, who is the head coach's guy, who could vouch for him if the Trent Baalke, Ethan Waugh infrastructure was to remain. Obviously, as we now know, Trent Baalke is gone. Ethan Waugh remains, but we'll see how long that is. So let's revisit some of those names, because now that Trent Baalke is gone, I think we can go right to tier 2, Gus, of those 3 big names that I've been told about for months now. Ian Cunningham, the assistant general manager of the Chicago Bears. I have on good intel there's interest there from both the Jacksonville Jaguars and from Cunningham's camp. He was raised by Ozzie Newsome in the Baltimore Ravens scouting system. He then spent time with the Philadelphia Eagles. Yes, there will be those of you who have concerns about what have the Chicago Bears done with him and Ryan Poles at the helm. I can tell you there's a lot of respect for Ian Cunningham, not just at the negotiating table from free agents, but it's also from people in the scouting community who value his insight as a former player himself at the collegiate level at the University of Virginia. I also would encourage those of you who are AEW fans to go back, and I believe it was either the Roku Draft Day special or whatever behind the scenes it was, where it shows Ryan Poles and Ian Cunningham sitting in the draft room, and Tony Khan with the neck brace pops up on screen, and Ryan Poles goes, "What the heck is he wearing?" And Ian Cunningham explains, "Well, it's from a bit during AEW that he," and explains the whole thing better than I could. So, he already has some brownie points in my estimation. The other two names, Brandon Brown, the assistant general manager of the New York Giants. He began his career with he was also with the Eagles before Joe Shane poached him to bring him to New York. He's also been with the Colts, the Jets, and Boston College, and so well-traveled as well. Another assistant GM. Another assistant GM who I'd have my eye on is with the Los Angeles Chargers, was brought with Joe Ortiz and the Jim Harbaugh administration last year. That's Chad Alexander. Up to that point, had spent 20 years with the Baltimore Ravens organization. Shad Khan has always been interested in what has made the Baltimore Ravens and Philadelphia Eagles such sustainable franchises, especially when it comes to their front office and their scouting department. And so those three names for me have been at the top of the list for most of these back channel search firms for months now. And I know that those names have been brought forth to not just the Jacksonville Jaguars potentially, but to all the teams that had potential vacancies at the general manager position.
There you have it. Now, in terms of defensive coordinator, Robert Saleh is reportedly taking the 49ers job after his interview with the Jaguars was canceled during the whole Coen fiasco. And so with Saleh supposedly out, now they've got Patrick Graham, who's brought in for – did he complete his second interview this week?
Yep, so yesterday morning. He was very much at the Miller Electric Center from what I was told by multiple folks. He was very much in the building yesterday.
So I would assume that he is the front runner to be Liam Coen's defensive coordinator. But if not, who are some names that you're thinking of in terms of coordinator for both sides of the ball?
Yeah, I will tell you, a leak source told me earlier this week that there are several current, former, future DCs that have expressed interest in not only the Jaguars job, but have said, look at all that talent. I could fix them. I could fix them. One name I will introduce into the conversation, especially if Robert Saleh is to go back to San Francisco, is the current assistant head coach. He's not the DC. He's the assistant head coach. And if this happens, Gus Logue, I'm going to have to delete so many tweets. I am talking about former Rams defensive coordinator, former Chargers head coach, Brandon Staley. That's if, again, I think Patrick Graham is 1B, 1A to Robert Saleh, which I still think there's a chance. I know that, our friend Mike Silver at The Athletic has reported that he thinks it's a done deal. I tend to agree with him, but I also think there's an outside shot still because, again, there's such respect between the Khans and Robert Saleh. I would be miffed if I'm him to find out the events of the last 24, 36 hours, knowing he was scheduled to fly into Duval last night. I get it. Especially when you finish second in the running to Urban Meyer in 2021. And now you're to be told you finished second to a offensive coordinator who's never been a head coach before. I understand that. I also know that there's respect between the Coen and the Saleh camps. And so that's where I would like to hold out hope because we held out hope that the Jaguars would be able to throw the Hail Mary and get Liam Coen. And so that's why I'm going to hold out hope. But yes, Patrick Graham, whose numbers our friend Daniel Griffiths pulled a bunch of them in terms of statistically speaking, while Patrick Graham has not necessarily been a member of a playoff contender the last few years, he's been able to churn out lemonade with lemons, top 15 defenses year in and year out. Yep. And it truly would be the attack style defense that not only Doug Peterson craved, but that Shad Khan has said he wants to run. And so that's where I think that Patrick Graham makes a lot of sense. Brandon Staley does make sense because I know that there's a list. Obviously, there's always a list because there's a binder that all of these candidates go into their interviews with. And I know that for Liam Coen, former longtime DC, former head coaches, that was the priority at that defense coordinator position.
Yeah, I think Brandon Staley still has kind of a lot to prove, not even because of his days with the Chargers and obviously the comeback against the Jaguars, just come back against them in the playoffs comes to mind. But before that, he was with the Rams, and that was when he did his best work. But he also had Aaron Donald in his prime and Jalen Ramsey in his prime. So those two were able to solve a ton of problems for him on the defensive side of the ball. And you don't always get to Hall of Fame caliber players on the same side of the ball. And so I think Staley's probably a great coach, but it'll be interesting to see if/when/where he gets another shot to be a defensive coordinator. I'm sure it will come at at some point, though. In terms of the offensive side of the ball, what are you thinking? I think Pete's is a name that I've heard.
Yes. Yep.
Pete's?
Yeah, that's a name, and he overlapped with Liam while they were in LA. He actually, if you can believe it, Gus, the early years of his NFL career at 25 years old, hired as a scouting assistant here, the Jacksonville Jaguars under Jack
Oh,
Del
hey.
Rio. Then later returned as a scout, and then convinced Mike Mularkey, hey, I actually want to be a coach, and so was made an offensive quality control coach for that one Mike Mularkey led 2012 season. And so I mean, there's a connection there, and he's only 37 years old. He has been a little well-traveled in the last 4 to 5 years. I think that's been necessity of different teams that have interest in someone who has a background with the Rams, but also now has a background with Seattle and the Ryan Grubb air raid, whatever they were running up there this year. And so it's an interesting name to watch. I know that Greg Allman noted a couple other names that potentially could follow Liam Coen to Jacksonville. I want to make sure I spell his name right. It's the passing game specialist he brought with him who went to Yale. Josh Grizzard. Josh Grizzard, 34 years old, Yale grad, coached at Duke, was with the Dolphins for 7 years before he came with the Bucs last year. Liam Coen, it should be noted, and it's a thank you to Todd Bowles. So to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers fans in the comments, I do have praise for your head coach, who I respect, by the way. Great friend of our friend Dave Campo, and a friend of Dave Campo is a friend of mine. Todd Bowles has proven that he can build a staff, and so you all need to calm down. This man accurately hit on Dave Canales and Liam Coen in back-to-back years. It's not his fault that they both were so good they became head coaches. So you all need to relax. I trust Todd Bowles. Additionally, Todd Bowles allowed Dave Canales to absolutely pillage his own staff in Tampa and bring people, including longtime Bruce Arians lieutenants, up to Carolina with him. I am a little curious if he will give Liam Coen that same leeway. Here's the thing, though, Gus. Because Canales pillaged that staff, there were so many openings that Liam had to turn around and hire his own guys. And so now those guys are on the Tampa staff, but they're actually Liam guys. They're not Todd Bowles guys. And so that's where I'm very interested to see if some of those names, like Kevin Carberry, the offensive line coach, who was also with Liam when they were in LA, Grizzard is another name that clearly Liam identified. My Georgia fans are going to love this one. He identified a certain McClendon who was coaching in the SEC, despite the fact that they had never coached together, and said, I need to bring in that college influence to my wide receiver room. And so Liam has proven it's not just his buddies that he's hiring. But I think he's very forward thinking. And I keep going back to, and I actually need to text this league source back because I was talking with him last night and I completely spaced saying it. He said to me after the Jaguars lost to the Lions. What this team needs to do is go off the wall. They need to go to college and find out what is coming next in the league. And that is something that Liam Coen has done an amazing job of. And I understand, for those of you who want to talk about how he's bounced from spot to spot, Liam's done an amazing job with it in Tampa in 1 year, but also he and Sean McVay did it from 2017 through 2023, where they identified, hey, we need to go outside the box here. Part of why Liam was even hired in the first place. I mean, he was coaching at UMass and UMaine, for crying out loud, Gus. And Sean McVay said, I need to go out there and I need to find what's coming next and bring them in. And that's what Liam Coen has done. And so that's why I'm excited, because I don't know if it's just going to be, I'm going to go to Tampa and pillage that roster and that staff that I brought together with Todd a season ago. It may be, hey, let me look around, and part of the reality is, because he coached for 2 years in the SEC, do he and Mark Stoops know something we don't, of some, I don't know, the next Joe Brady at LSU, that he says, hey, let's bring this kid in and bring him to Jacksonville. By the way, Jake Peetz also was the offense coordinator at LSU during that failed final season of Ed Orgeron. And do you want to know who was the one who was the reference to get Jake Peetz to LSU? Oh, that's right, Joe Brady. So the irony is not lost on me in terms of where Liam could go for that OC hire. I do think, again, the Carberry name is interesting, not because I think he's an OC per se, but because to get him to Jacksonville, if Liam wants to get him to Jacksonville, he would have to give him an elevated title. And so whether that's run game coordinator or he makes him the offense coordinator, there's a lot of smoke that perhaps Ben Johnson will hire Hank Fraley, the offensive line coach with the Detroit Lions, because they're buddies. He's the run game coordinator up there with Detroit. And to bring him to Chicago, he would have to give him that elevated title.
Yeah, that's fantastic context especially in terms of Canales' staff, and then looking towards college ranks to see what's coming up next in the NFL. I think part of the reason this is such an exciting and good hire for the Jaguars is that it's a first-time head coach who has not been to the top of the mountain before. Like Doug Peterson did a great job of bringing RPOs kind of from college to the NFL level, and that helped spur the Eagles' Super Bowl. But then after that, his offense kind of ran stale, and he wasn't drawing as many new ideas from whether it was college or anywhere. And so the fact that they have, again, a guy who hasn't climbed a mountain yet, and so he'll be motivated to continue to be innovative and pull new ideas from anywhere and everywhere, I think is a great sign. And definitely you threw out a lot of great names, but
I got some more, by the way. I forgot that in the previous page from our build your franchise episode, which fix your franchise episode, excuse me, which if you guys want to listen to that on demand, it's available at the 1010XL Jaguars YouTube page, as well as our podcast network. Some other names to keep an eye on. Spencer Whipple is currently a passing game specialist with the Arizona Cardinals. So that's an easy one that you just either make him the passing game coordinator or the quarterback's coach, and he can come over here to Jacksonville as well. He was the co-offensive coordinator with Liam Coen at UMass, where his father, Mark Whipple, of course, was the head coach. So file that one away as well. Shane Waldron's already gotten one reference on this program. I know Taylor Dahl is somewhere punching the air. Shane Waldron was the one who brought Liam Coen into the NFL with the Los Angeles Rams because of their ties at UMass together. I could see a world in which he comes in, and whether it's tight ends coach, where he initially was coaching with Sean McVay, maybe he's the quarterback's coach. I wouldn't be surprised to see a bone thrown his way. A couple other names to watch for. I mentioned Brian McClendon, who's currently the Bucs wide receivers coach, but he obviously coached at Georgia and South Carolina and played at Georgia. Leonard Hankerson, Florida native, San Francisco wide receivers coach. I don't know what the contract status is there, but that's another name that's been thrown my way. I know there are those of you who would love to see Cortez come from LSU, and I don't know. But again, I go back to Liam coached against him in the SEC. So if there is intrigue there, there's a precedent that's been set that perhaps he could bring him from college. And then I threw this dart as well in that program that we did. Cadillac Williams, who was a player for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when Sean McVay was on the staff of John Gruden. And so I just threw a dart there on that one. So a couple other names to watch for on the offensive side of the ball.
Love it. I'm especially interested to see what they do at offensive line coach, or whether they even hire an offensive line coach to be the offensive coordinator, just because I think me and you and Tony Pacelli and Liam Coen and pretty much 99% of Jacksonville would agree that they need to not just invest in the trenches, but just be better in the trenches in general, and especially on the offensive line. So I'm excited for that. Also, I think running back coach will be an underrated one to watch out for, just because they've got two young backs in Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. And Liam Coen likes to run a lot of pony personnel, which is two running back personnel. He had a lot of success with it with Bucky Irving and Rashad White last year in Tampa Bay. And so it'll be, I think that obviously the offense comes and goes as Trevor Lawrence goes. And if not Trevor Lawrence, and Brian Thomas Jr. But those two backs, not just either one of them, but both of them, will be really important for Liam Coen's Jaguars offense next year. So, that's kind of all I got. You got any other lingering thoughts or anything else you want to empty out from the notebook before we get out of here?
Yeah, I'm going to read some of the national reports. We'll begin with Jeff Darlington, because I do, especially given that we found some Tampa fans that have invaded our comments. Hey, Reedy, we're glad that Reedy's in the chat.
Reedy's here.
He's a weekly listener here live on the Duval Rundown. We're glad you could join us, Reedy. Jeff Darlington reported that the reality was people within the Bucs organization knew that Liam Coen was ready to be a head coach. And even after I was already on the train of following and seeing where this could go, I had enough league sources come to me and say, no, that's reality. There are those around the league that felt he was more ready to be a head coach than Ben Johnson is. So again, that's a couple people's opinion, but just putting it out there. And there are those who've pushed back. I had people calling me last night saying, this is a joke. The Jags look like a joke. This guy's a joke. And I'm like, okay, well then why do I also have people who I trust saying this is an amazing hire? So like, it's the reality of the situation. So back to Jeff Darlington. he reports verbatim, had Bowles' team not made the playoffs, there was a very real world where Coen replaced him. Earlier this week, the Bucs thought they avoided the catch-22 when he agreed to stay to be the OC. The Jaguars' job without Trent Baalke, though, was viewed by several top coaching candidates as the top gig. That's what makes it so twisted. It took someone to fire someone, either Baalke or Todd Bowles, to land and keep Coen. That's uncomfortable space for any team to live in. And I honestly thought that was a fan-derived narrative. I've said it here. I've said it on Helmets and Heels for weeks. So the fact that Jeff Darlington's reporting it is wild to me. Todd Bowles is one of 3 coaches in the NFL who has won 3 straight division titles. And so it's very, very surprising to me to hear that that's reality. This one's interesting. And like, again, it's the national media may crucify the Jaguars, and that's okay. But I want you to know that, again, one of my favorite sayings, take football out of it. If this was happening in your business, no one's saying anything because it's just good negotiating and good business. So Albert Breer reports, and I'll read this portion of his mailbag from this morning. The secrecy over Coen's visit did serve 2 theoretical purposes. One, obviously, would preserve the Tampa offer for Coen, which again was contingent on the OC not visiting Jacksonville. 2, it allowed the Jaguars to satisfy the Rooney Rule. Going into Thursday, they only had 1 minority candidate for an in-person interview. Salah's was in person. They needed 2 to comply, so Graham was slated to come in Thursday for 1, but the Jags didn't want word out of their plans getting out, which would cause Graham to cancel. On Thursday morning, Graham came in. The Jags called Robert Saleh to cancel his scheduled second interview on Friday morning. So there are those who will clutch their pearls and be upset about this. And I respect it. Diversity is important. But this is what you do. By having rules like this, you open up the political can of worms. So I just want you to know, Jaguar fans, correct, Hef, you are going to be villainized. I'm warning you now. Like, they are going to come at you with pitchforks and they're going to say that the Jaguars, yada, yada, yada. Like, I mean, not too unlike, and this is, obviously different because he is half black, but like when Mike McDaniel was hired, it was like, people were losing their minds in Miami because they're like, first off, who is this guy? Second of all, they didn't interview a second minority candidate. And it was like, well, no, Mike McDaniel is the minority candidate. And I know there were people who were upset about that. If you've seen his father, it's definitively he's black. So point being, this is always going to be an uncomfortable can of worms, just like the uncomfortable can of worms that Jeff Darlington described of if the Bucs were to have said goodbye to Todd Bowles because they recognize Liam Coen as the future head coach. I don't believe, outside of perhaps this Pete Carroll situation, I don't believe in having in a contract, this is the successor, this is the next head coach. Look how that burned the New England Patriots in the last 18 months, having that written into Gerard Mayo's contract. But at the same time, the fact that it was reality and floated there, I don't know what's more uncomfortable, that or the Rooney Rule situation.
I'd probably say the Rooney Rule situation, but speaking of the Patriots, that coach ended up taking a Jets job and ended up leaving it, and it worked out pretty well for the team that he joined. So.
And yes, thank you to Herwick Kane in the YouTube chat. They got shady. Correct. The Patriots, I would argue, it was even more shady with the Pep Hamilton, Byron Leftwich back-to-back interviews on the same day, and suddenly they're hiring Mike Vrabel 4 hours later. Like that. If anything, that's. I would say that's just as bad in my estimation.
No, that is pretty awful. But fortunately,
I don't want to end on awful notes, but since I want to brace you guys for what's about to come in the next few hours, which again, as we're recording this, and we do have to wrap up here shortly because I have another call coming. We don't have the official contract, but by all accounts, the Jaguars and Liam Coen have backed themselves into a corner of no return. He will be the next head coach because if he's not, I don't know where he's coaching next year. And if the Jaguars don't get Liam Coen, and if the Jaguars don't get Liam Coen, they've upset Robert Saleh apparently. And
right.
I'm sure Kellen Moore and Joe Brady would still be interested, but yeah, it's a credit to the Jags. They went and they got their man. Credit to them.
They went all in and they got him. I remember when all in was the slogan of the team back in like 2013 or 2014, like some horrible Blaine Gabbert year.
Funny enough, Gus,
a new slogan each year in the offseason to hype up the team. And Jaguars fans always say offseason is the most fun. And I mean, they're kind of right a little bit, but hopefully because of this super fun, amazing offseason news, regular seasons will be more fun in the years to come for Jaguars fans.
And funny enough, since you referenced 2013, the last time the Jaguars actually cleared house and had a new head coach
Hmm.
and a new general manager who had previously not been in the building. And that, Gus, was 12 years ago. I was a sophomore in college.
It's been a minute, but
How old were you in 2013 when Gus Bradley took over with Dave?
I was in middle school. I was 14.
There we go. There, folks, mic drop. That's all you need to know. And by the way, just a tease to Helmets and Heels coming up in an hour. It's not just the head coach and GM position that are in need of a refresh. That my understanding, Liam Coen plans on delivering throughout the Miller Electric Center.
Whew, goosebumps. Here we go. Team Coen. It's a new era, baby. Let's go. I'm fired up.
Rise up.
Appreciate everyone for tuning in for this special extra bonus episode, Friday edition. We'll be back on Tuesday for regularly scheduled programming. Look out for the Coen news. We're expecting it to drop at some point in the next hour, at least I'll say, is what I expect. So yeah, have a good weekend, Jaguars fans. We'll see you next week.